Hey, tonight we're diving into a truly magical time in history, the mysterious Dark Age Britain of King Arthur's time. Get cozy under your blankets, maybe light a soft candle if you'd like, and let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you back through time. I promise, by the end of our journey together, you'll see both the challenges and wonders of this fascinating era in a whole new light. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 5th century Britain, around the year 450. The air feels different, fresher, wilder somehow. There's a cool morning mist hovering just above the ground, and the scent of wood smoke drifts through the air. The good news is that you've arrived in a time of incredible change and fascinating possibilities. The bad news? Well, let's just say this isn't exactly the most peaceful moment in British history. You find yourself standing on a grassy hilltop, overlooking a small village nestled in a valley. Down below, thatched roof houses cluster together like mushrooms sprouting after rain. Thin trails of smoke rise from their center openings. This is Britain just as the Roman legions have departed these shores, leaving behind a land in transition. For nearly 400 years, Britain had been part of the mighty Roman Empire. The Romans, those people in fancy armor who built straight roads and large bathhouses where they liked to soak and gossip. They had brought order, luxury goods, and a certain way of life that many people had gotten quite used to. But now they're gone, their legions called back to Rome to deal with troubles closer to home. It happened about 40 years ago, a voice says beside you. You turn to find an old man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He leans on a wooden staff and gazes down at the village. I was just a boy when the last Roman soldiers boarded their ships. Some say Emperor Honorius sent a letter telling us Britons to look to our own defense. Others say it was that General Constantine who took our soldiers away for his wars. Either way, they left us. The old man gestures toward the valley. The good news is that we're still here, still living, still growing food and raising our children. The bad news is that without the Roman legions, others have come who want our lands. From this hilltop, you can see how the landscape is divided into small fields with low stone walls. There are sheep grazing on the hillsides, and in some of the fields, you notice people working the land with simple tools. It's a peaceful scene, but there's also a tension in the air, like the feeling before storm. Who am I? The old man chuckles when you ask. I'm just Caddock, once a stone mason who worked on the Roman buildings in the town of Corinium. Now I'm just an old man who remembers the old days. Caddock invites you to walk with him down to the village. As you descend the gentle slope, he explains how life has changed since the Romans left. We still use some of their old buildings, of course. Why build new when perfectly good walls stand ready? But many of the finer things are harder to come by. The pottery from Gaul, the olive oil from Hispania, the fine glass vessels, those trading ships don't come as often as they once did. As you enter the village, you notice immediately how different it is from the Roman towns that once dominated Britain. Gone are the straight streets laid out in grids, the stone buildings with their red-tiled roofs, the forums and bathhouses. Instead, this village seems more organic, with round or rectangular houses arranged in family groupings. Most houses are simple affairs, wooden frames covered with wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. The roofs are thatched with reeds or straw, and in the center is an opening to let the smoke escape from the hearth inside. These homes aren't divided into separate rooms like modern houses. Instead, each house is basically one large room where the family lives, cooks, eats, and sleeps together. Come, says Caddock, beckoning you toward one of the larger houses at the center of the village. Let's see if Branwen has any of her morning bread to share. Inside the house, the air is warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread. The floor is packed earth, and in the center burns a small fire in a stone-lined pit. Smoke rises lazily toward the hole in the thatched roof. Around the walls are simple wooden benches and shelves holding pottery containers, wooden bowls, and tools. A woman with graying hair woven into a long braid looks up from where she's tending the fire. This is Branwen, the village's most respected healer and midwife. Her eyes crinkle with welcome as she sees Kadok, and she gestures for you both to sit on the benches near the fire. "Breaking your fast, are you?" she asks, pulling a flat loaf from the edge of the fire. She breaks it into pieces, handing you a warm, fragrant chunk. It's coarser than the bread you might be used to, made from barley rather than wheat, but it's delicious all the same, especially when she drizzles it with a bit of honey from a small pottery jar. "Our visitor has come from far away," Kadok tells Branwen, who nods as if the arrival of strangers from distant times isn't all that unusual. "Then you'll be wanting to know how we live," she says, settling beside you. "It's simple, but good. Our life here. We grow our barley and our vegetables. We raise sheep for wool and meat, and keep some cattle. The forest gives us game and honey, berries, and nuts in their seasons." You notice that she wears a simple woolen dress, dyed a deep blue, with a cloak pinned at the shoulder with a bronze brooch. Around her neck is a leather cord from which hangs a small cross, evidence that Christianity has taken root in Britain during the Roman years. "The old ways and the new flow together like streams joining a river," she says, noticing your glance at her cross. "Some follow the Christ, some honor the old gods, and many do a bit of both, just to be safe." As you eat, more villagers begin to drop by, curious about the newcomer. They're dressed similarly to Branwen, the men in simple tunics and breeches, the women in long dresses. Their clothes are made of wool or linen, often dyed with natural colors from plants, blues, greens, yellows, and reds. Most wear leather shoes or boots, though some of the children run barefoot. A young man named Garant tells you proudly about his work as a blacksmith. "I learned from my father, who learned from his," he says. "The skill of working iron is precious. We can't make the fine things the Romans once brought, but I can forge a good blade or mend a broken plow." You notice that despite the departure of the Romans, their influence lingers. Some villagers use Latin words mixed with their British Celtic language. The pottery, though cruder than Roman wares, still shows some Roman styling. And when Branwen treats a child's cut finger, her knowledge of healing herbs comes from a mixture of traditional wisdom and Roman medical knowledge. As the morning progresses, you help the villagers with their daily tasks. You join women grinding grain between round stones to make flour. You watch men repairing the thatch on a roof, working together with practiced efficiency. Children collect eggs from the chickens that scratch in the dirt between houses, and older boys drive the sheep to pasture. "It's not always this peaceful," Kadok tells you as you help him mend a wooden fence. "That's why most of our villages are built on higher ground now, with ditches and earthen banks for protection. The good news is that we can see enemies coming. The bad news is that they still come." He explains how the departure of the Romans left Britain vulnerable. "From across the eastern sea come the Saxons," he says, his voice lowering. "Tall, fierce warriors with axes and long knives. Some say the British leaders invited some as mercenaries to help fight against the Picts and Scots who raid from the north, but now more come, bringing their families, looking to settle on our lands." The worry in his voice is clear, and you begin to understand why this period would later be called the Dark Ages. It's not that culture or learning disappeared entirely, but that the orderly Roman world had given way to something more uncertain, more dangerous. "But we have hope," says a strong voice behind you. You turn to see a tall young man with broad shoulders and clear, intelligent eyes. He's dressed more finely than the other villagers, with a tunic of good cloth and a cloak pinned with a silver brooch. A sword hangs at his side, not a crude weapon, but one of fine craftsmanship. This is Bedwyr, Caddoc says with obvious respect. He rides with the war band of our king. Bedwyr nods in greeting. I've come to bring news, he tells the gathering villagers. Our lord has won a great victory against the Saxon raiders near Baden Hill. Their ships have been driven back to the sea. A cheer rises from the villagers, and you feel their relief like a physical thing. This battle, Baden Hill, rings a bell in your memory. It's one of the few historical events associated with the legendary King Arthur in later chronicles. Is your lord? You begin to ask Bedwyr, but he's already moving toward Branwen's house, where it seems a council of village elders will hear his news in more detail. Come, says Caddoc, guiding you to follow. You should hear this too. Inside Branwen's house, more benches have been brought in, and the important people of the village gather. The blacksmith, a weathered farmer with calloused hands, an elderly woman whose intricate cloak pin marks her as someone of status, and several others. You and Caddoc find places at the edge of the circle. Bedwyr stands in the center, the firelight casting dramatic shadows across his face as he speaks. Our lord, the Bear of Britain, the Dux Bellorum, the leader of battles, has proven again why the tribes chose him as High King. You feel a tingle of excitement. The Bear of Britain, in Latin, that would be Ardus or Artorius, names that could easily evolve into Arthur in later tellings. The Saxons came with 30 ships, Bedwyr continues, landing near the old Roman fort at Portus Adorni. They burned 3 villages before our lord could gather his war band, but gather he did, calling on warriors from many tribes, the Dumnoni, the Cornovi, the Dobuni, and more. As Bedwyr speaks, you can almost see the battle in your mind's eye, not the romanticized version from later medieval tales, but something grittier and more real. Warriors in iron helmets and leather armor, carrying spears, swords, and round wooden shields, not knights in shining plate armor on horseback, but fierce fighters on tough little ponies or on foot in tight formations. Our lord led the charge himself, Bedwyr says with pride. His sword flashed like lightning in the rain. The Saxons broke before him, and those who could fled back to their ships. You notice how Bedwyr never actually names this lord, this Bear of Britain. Perhaps the name Arthur came later, or perhaps it was a title rather than a name. Historians have long debated whether Arthur was one real person, a composite of several leaders, or purely a legend. But in this moment, in this village, the people clearly believe in their protector. After the formal news, the meeting breaks up into smaller conversations. You listen as Bedwyr answers questions from the villagers. Yes, their lord's fortress at Cadbury is being strengthened with new earthworks. No, the Saxon leader called Aele has not been captured, but has retreated to his settlements in the east. Yes, warriors from loyal villages would be welcome to join the High King's war band, especially those with their own weapons and horses. As evening approaches, the village prepares for a modest feast to celebrate the good news. A pair of geese are roasting over the communal fire pit at the village center. Women bring out loaves of bread, wooden bowls of peas pottage, a thick soup of dried peas, and crocks of ale made from fermented barley. The ale is served in wooden cups or pottery mugs, and you notice it's weaker than modern beer, safer to drink than water from streams that might be contaminated, and a valuable source of calories and nutrients for hard-working people. The feast is simple by modern standards, but to these villagers, it's a joyful occasion. As darkness falls, someone produces a small harp, and songs begin, some in British Celtic, some in Latin. The songs tell of brave deeds in battle, of the old Roman days, of the Christian saints who brought their faith to Britain, and of the old gods of hill and stream who some still honor in secret. Bedwyr sits beside you at one point and speaks in a lower voice. "You're not from any tribe, I know," he says, studying your face. "Your speech is strange, your manner different, yet Kadok vouches for you, and he's a wise man. You ask him more about his lord, this possible Arthur figure, trying not to seem too eager or too knowledgeable about a future where this leader would become the stuff of legend. My lord is a man of both worlds," Bedwyr says thoughtfully. His grandfather was Roman, a commander of cavalry. His mother's people were of the old royal line of the Dobunni tribe. He was educated by Christian monks, but honors the old ways too. He describes a leader who has united many of the British tribes under his banner to stand against the Saxon incursions. He's not a king in the old sense, claiming power through blood alone. The tribal leaders chose him for his wisdom in council and his courage in battle. He takes counsel from many, from warriors, from Christian priests, from the old druids who still keep the ancient knowledge. You ask about Camelot, about a round table of knights, about Merlin the wizard, the elements of Arthurian legend that would develop over the centuries. Bedwyr looks puzzled at some of these questions. "My lord holds his court at the old hill fort at Cadbury," he says. "It's a strong place, with new walls of earth and timber reinforcing the ancient ramparts. As for a round table," he laughs, "our lord does insist that when the tribal leaders meet in council, they sit in a circle so that none may claim precedence over others. Is that what you mean? And Merlin?" Bedwyr's expression grows more serious. "There is a wise man who advises my lord. Myrddin, he's called. Some say he's a Christian monk who studied in Rome. Others whisper he's one of the old druids. He knows the stars and the healing plants. He remembers the old histories and the bloodlines of the tribes. But a wizard?" He shrugs. "The Christ priests would call such talk sinful." As the evening deepens, the celebration grows quieter. Children have fallen asleep on their parents' laps. The fire burns lower. Kadok finds you and leads you to his own small house at the edge of the village. "You can sleep here tonight," he says, showing you to a simple pallet of straw covered with woolen blankets. "Tomorrow, if you wish, you can go with Bedwyr when he returns to our lord's fortress. Perhaps you'll find more answers there to the questions I see burning in your eyes." As you settle onto the surprisingly comfortable bed, listening to the night sounds of the village, a dog barking in the distance, the soft lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind in the thatch, you reflect on what you've learned. This Dark Age Britain is both familiar and strange. The people have the same hopes and fears as people in any time. They want safety, enough food, a meaningful life. But they live in a world where the old Roman certainties have crumbled, where new threats and new possibilities swirl like the mist in the valleys. The legend of King Arthur would grow from this soil, from real battles against Saxon invaders, from the mixture of Roman and Celtic cultures, from the blend of Christianity and older beliefs. Later storytellers would add shining armor, courtly romance, magical swords, and the quest for the Holy Grail. But here, in this village on this night, you've glimpsed something of the historical reality that might lie behind the myth. As sleep begins to claim you, you wonder what tomorrow will bring, what you might discover at the fortress of the Bear of Britain. The blanket is warm, the night sounds soothing, and your last thought before drifting off is that even in these so-called dark ages, there are plenty of lights still burning. You wake to the soft sounds of the village coming to life, the gentle lowing of cattle, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, and the murmur of voices as people begin their day's work. Sunlight filters through the small smoke hole in Kadok's roof, casting a dusty beam across the packed earth floor. For a moment, You feel suspended between dreams and reality, between your own time and this ancient world of Dark Age Britain. Caddock is already up, stoking a small fire in the central hearth. "Good morning," he says, noticing you're awake. "Bedwyr plans to leave for our Lord's fortress after breaking fast. If you still wish to go with him, best rise and prepare yourself." Outside, the morning air is crisp and clean in a way you've never experienced before. Without factories, cars, or power plants, the sky is a deeper blue than you've ever seen, and the sense of wood smoke, earth, and growing things fill your lungs. You realize that in this world, people rise and sleep with the sun. There are no electric lights to extend the day, no clocks to regiment time beyond the natural rhythms of daylight and darkness. At the village center, people gather to share a morning meal of leftover bread, some early berries, and a thin porridge made from barley. Bedwyr is there, speaking with a young man who appears to be preparing to join him on the journey. "Ah, our visitor," Bedwyr says, nodding to you. "Caddock says you wish to travel with me to my lord's stronghold. Good. We welcome those who come in peace and bring news from distant places." The young man beside him is introduced as Gawain, a name that sends a little tingle of recognition through you. Could this be the origin of the legendary Sir Gawain of later Arthurian tales? This Gawain is no knight in shining armor, though. He's a sturdy youth of perhaps 18 years, dressed in simple woolen clothes with a short sword at his hip and a wooden shield slung across his back. Gawain has decided to join our Lord's war band, Bedwyr explains. His father was a warrior before him, and the boy has skill with blade and spear. Soon, you're ready to depart. The villagers gather to bid farewell, with Branwen pressing a small pouch of dried herbs into your hands. "For strength on the journey," she says with a warm smile. Caddock clasps your forearm in the warrior's grip that was common in these times. "Perhaps our paths will cross again," he says. "May your god or gods watch over you until then." Your journey begins on foot, following old trackways that wind through valleys and forests. "We'll meet horses at the next village," Bedwyr explains. "My lord keeps mounts stationed at friendly settlements for his messengers." As you walk, the landscape of 5th century Britain unfolds around you. It's both familiar and strange. The rolling hills, the woodlands, the meadows are in the same places they'll be in your time, but their character is entirely different. The forests are deeper and more extensive, covering much of the land that will later be cleared for agriculture. These are ancient woodlands of oak, ash, birch, and hazel, teeming with life: deer, wild boar, wolves, and countless birds. "The forest gives us much," Bedwyr says, noticing your gaze. "Wood for our houses and our fires, game for our tables, honey from the wild bees, nuts and berries in their seasons. The monks say their God made the forest for man's use, but the old wisdom teaches that we are part of it, not its masters." You pass occasional fields where farmers work the land with simple tools: wooden plows, sometimes tipped with iron, pulled by oxen, wooden rakes and hoes, sickles for harvesting grain. The fields are small by modern standards, often surrounded by earthen banks or rough stone walls. The good lands near the villages are worked in common, Gawain explains. Each family has their strip to tend, but all help with the plowing and harvesting. You notice that the crops are different from modern farms. There's barley and some wheat, but also spelt, rye, and oats. Between the planted fields are fallow areas where livestock graze, mostly sheep and some cattle, smaller than modern breeds. Around midday, you stop by a clear stream to rest and eat some of the provisions Branwen packed: hard bread, dried meat, and a small clay pot of honey. As you eat, Bedwyr points out plants along the stream bank. "That one there," "Water mint is good for stomach ailments," he says, "and that one with the white flowers is meadow sweet. The healers use it for fevers and aches. My lord's advisor, Murden, knows all the plants and their uses. Some call him a magician for his knowledge, but he says it's just the old wisdom, passed down through generations. This mention of Murden, the historical figure who might have inspired the legendary Merlin, piques your curiosity. You ask Bedwyr more about him. Murden was born to the north, among the Vodadini tribe, Bedwyr says. His mother was a wise woman, his father a bard who knew all the old stories. When the Christ priests came to their village, Murden learned their wisdom too, their writing, their knowledge of distant lands. Some say he studied in the great library at Eberacum before the Saxons took the city. This blend of Druidic knowledge and Christian learning might explain how the historical Myrddin evolved into the wizardly Merlin of later legends. In this transitional period, the old Celtic wisdom was merging with Christian teachings, creating a unique cultural blend. As the day progresses, you arrive at a larger village where horses await. These are not the massive destriers of later medieval knight stories, but smaller, hardier mounts, similar to modern ponies. They're sure-footed and tough, well-suited to the rough terrain of 5th century Britain. Mounted now, you make better time, traveling along what remains of an old Roman road. Though unmaintained for decades, the Roman engineering was so sound that parts of the road are still usable, a raised causeway of packed gravel and stone cutting straight across the landscape. The Romans built well, Bedwyr acknowledges. Their roads, their walls, their fortresses, much still stands. My lord says we should learn from them, take what was good in their ways, while holding to the best of our own traditions. As you ride, Bedwyr points out places of interest, a distant hill fort from the old days before the Romans, the ruins of a Roman villa, now partially dismantled as villagers repurpose the stone, a sacred spring where people still leave offerings, Christian crosses now mingling with the older Celtic tokens. By late afternoon, you begin to climb higher, following a ridge that offers expansive views of the surrounding countryside. In the distance, you can see what appears to be a large hill with terraced earthworks circling its summit. Even from here, you can make out movement on those ramparts, people going about their business, guards patrolling the walls. Cadbury, Bedwyr says with evident pride, the stronghold of our Lord, the Bear of Britain. As you draw closer, you realize that what appeared to be a natural hill is actually an ancient fort, its defenses recently strengthened and expanded. Multiple rings of earthen ramparts circle the hill, creating tiered defenses. Wooden palisades top these earthworks, and at the main entrance, substantial timber gates stand open, guarded by men with spears and shields. This, then, might be the historical reality behind the legendary Camelot. Not a fantastical castle with soaring stone towers, but a practical, defensible stronghold combining ancient British hill fort traditions with newer innovations. Approaching the gates, Bedwyr is recognized immediately. The guards straighten, thumping their spear butts against the ground in salute. They eye you and Gawain with curiosity, but ask no questions. Bedwyr's word is clearly sufficient to grant you entry. Inside the gates, you find yourself in a bustling community. The hilltop is covered with buildings of various sizes, most built of timber with wattle and daub walls and thatched roofs, but some using stone salvaged from Roman ruins. At the very top of the hill stands the largest structure, a great hall with smoke rising from a central opening in its roof. People of all kinds move purposefully through the settlement. warriors in leather armor with swords at their sides, craftspeople carrying their tools, women with baskets of food or bundles of cloth, children running errands or playing in the open spaces. There's none of the rigid class separation that will characterize the medieval period. This is a more egalitarian society, though still with clear leadership. Bedwyr leads you to a smaller building near the Great Hall. "Rest here," he says. "Refresh yourselves. I must report to my lord, but with good fortune, you'll meet him at the evening meal in the hall." The building proves to be a guest house of sorts, with several sleeping pallets along the walls and a small hearth in the center. A young boy brings water for washing and takes your cloaks. "Are you from beyond the sea?" the boy asks, eyes wide with curiosity. You wear strange clothes, and your speech is odd. You give him a vague answer about coming from far away, which seems to satisfy him. He introduces himself as Say, another name that rings bells from Arthurian legend, as Say would evolve into the Sir Kay of later stories. After washing away the dust of travel, you and Gawain venture out to explore the stronghold. The atmosphere is one of purpose and energy. This is clearly a place where people feel hopeful despite the uncertain times. Near the center of the settlement, you find craftspeople at work in open-air workshops. A potter's wheel spins as skilled hands shape a vessel from local clay. Nearby, a weaver works at a vertical loom, creating cloth from wool dyed with plant materials. Wode for blue, madder for red, weld for yellow. A tanner stretches cured hides, while a leather worker cuts and stitches the finished leather into shoes, belts, and armor. "Our Lord encourages all skills," says a voice beside you. Turning, you see an older man with clear, intelligent eyes. His simple robe bears embroidered symbols that blend Christian and older Celtic designs. A wooden cross hangs at his neck, but also a small pouch that might contain herbs or charms. "I am Myrddin," he says, studying you with evident curiosity. "Bedwyr told me of your arrival. He says you ask many questions about our Lord and our ways. Your heart quickens at meeting this living version of Merlin, not a long-bearded wizard in starry robes, but a thoughtful man whose knowledge bridges multiple traditions. He radiates not magical power, but a deep wisdom and calm authority. Walk with me," Myrddin invites, "and perhaps we can enlighten each other." As you stroll through the settlement, Myrddin explains more about the community and its leader. "Our Lord was chosen by the Council of Tribes," he says. "In the old days, each tribe had its king, but when the Saxons began to settle our eastern shores in greater numbers, the wise among us saw that we must unite or fall one by one." He describes how the man you're increasingly certain must be the historical Arthur united various British tribes through diplomacy, martial prowess, and a vision of a Britain that preserved the best of both Roman and Celtic heritage. "He was raised and educated by an old Roman family," Myrddin says. "He reads both Latin and Greek, knows the military tactics of the great Roman generals, understands Roman law and administration, but his mother's blood is of the ancient royal line of the Dobuni, and he honors our tribal ways as well." When you ask about religious practices, Myrddin gives a nuanced answer. "The Christ faith has taken deep root in Britain," he acknowledges. "The Romans brought it, and many found truth in its teachings. Our Lord himself was baptized as a child. But the old ways have wisdom too, respect for the land, for the turning of the seasons, for the balance of all things. A wise leader honors both paths, taking what is good from each. This spiritual flexibility might explain why Arthur's court in later legends could incorporate both Christian elements like the Holy Grail and magical elements from older Celtic traditions. As evening approaches, people begin gathering toward the great hall at the summit. Cooking fires burn nearby, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air. You follow the flow of people up to the hall's entrance, a large doorway flanked by carved wooden posts. Inside, the hall is a single vast space. A central hearth runs down the middle, with smoke rising to vent through the roof opening. Long tables and benches line the sides, with a slightly raised platform at the far end holding a larger table. Torches in iron brackets and small oil lamps provide flickering light as darkness falls outside. The hall fills quickly, with people taking their places, warriors, craftspeople, visiting tribal leaders, all mingling with surprisingly little regard for rank or status. This is not yet the rigidly stratified society of the Middle Ages. A hush falls as a group enters from a side door near the high table. At their center walks a man of medium height but commanding presence. He's perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair showing touches of gray at the temples. He wears a fine tunic of deep red wool embroidered at the edges, with a cloak fastened by an impressive silver brooch. A sword hangs at his side, not the mythical Excalibur of legend, but clearly a weapon of fine craftsmanship. As this man takes his place at the center of the high table, Bedwyr appears at your side. "Come," he says, "our lord wishes to meet you." Heart-pounding, you follow Bedwyr to the high table. The man, surely the historical Arthur, though no one has yet spoken that name, regards you with keen intelligence. "Welcome to our hall," he says, in a voice accustomed to command, but warm with genuine welcome. "Bedwyr tells me you come from distant shores, with strange tales and questions about our ways." Before you can respond properly, there's a commotion at the hall's entrance. A warrior staggers in, blood seeping from a wound in his side. "My lord," he gasps, "Saxon ships, at least 20, landing near the old Roman port. They've burned the fishing village at the river mouth and are moving inland." The hall erupts in shouts and questions. The leader raises a hand, and silence falls immediately. "How many warriors?" he asks, his voice calm but urgent. "Several hundred at least," the messenger replies. "Led by a chief in a helm with raven wings." The leader nods thoughtfully, then begins issuing clear, concise orders. Warriors are to prepare to ride at first light. Messengers will be sent to allied villages to gather more fighters. Supplies must be readied for the campaign. As the hall buzzes with purposeful activity, the leader turns back to you. "It seems our conversation must wait," he says with a small smile. "War calls, as it so often does in these troubled times. But join us at our table tonight, and tomorrow, if you wish, ride with us to see how we defend our lands against those who would take them." You're seated near the high table, alongside Myrddin, who watches the proceedings with thoughtful eyes. Servants bring food: roasted venison and pork, barley bread, stewed vegetables, and small cakes made with honey. The drink is mead, a sweet fermented honey beverage, and a lighter ale made from barley. "This is the rhythm of our days," Myrddin comments quietly. Moments of peace and creation interrupted by the call to defend what we've built. It has been so since the legions left. Perhaps it will always be so. As the meal progresses, you observe the interaction between the leader and his people. There's respect, but not the fawning deference that will characterize relationships between lords and subjects in later medieval times. He listens to the council of tribal elders, of battle-hardened warriors, and of craftspeople with equal attention. When a dispute arises between two men over who should lead a particular warband, he settles it with wisdom and fairness. "He has created something rare here," Myrddin says, following your gaze. "Not just a warband or a tribal kingdom, but a community where all contribute according to their skills and all have voice in council. The Romans had their assemblies, and the tribes had their councils. Our Lord takes the best of both traditions." You notice that around the high table sit representatives of different tribes and regions, some with the dark features common to the original Britons, others with the lighter hair that might indicate some Roman ancestry. They're men and women alike, each apparently respected for their wisdom or skills. Is that the origin of the Round Table? You ask Murden in a low voice. He looks at you with renewed curiosity. Round Table? An interesting phrase. Our Lord does insist that in council we sit in a circle so that all may see each other's faces and speak with equal voice. In the old days, the tribal kings would argue endlessly about who should sit in the place of honor. Our Lord says that in his council, the only place of honor is earned by wisdom and courage, not by birth alone. This practical arrangement for tribal governance, it seems, would evolve over centuries of storytelling into the legendary Round Table of Arthurian romance. After the meal, warriors gather in small groups, preparing for tomorrow's campaign. Some sharpen blades or repair leather armor. Others speak in low voices about tactics and previous battles. A few seek quiet moments with loved ones before departure. You find yourself drawn to a small group near the edge of the settlement, where Bedwyr is instructing younger fighters, including Gawain. By the light of a small fire, he demonstrates sword techniques, moving with practiced grace. The Saxon fights with fury and strength, he explains. He charges forward with his shield and strikes with his long knife. But fury can be turned against itself. The disciplined warrior steps aside, lets the charge pass, then strikes. He demonstrates a fluid movement, stepping past Gawain's practice lunge and tapping him lightly on the back. This is not the stylized combat of later medieval romances, but practical battlefield technique, focused on survival and victory. These warriors aren't knights in shining armor, but practical fighters in leather and wool, carrying shields of lindenwood, spears of ash, and iron-bladed swords. As the evening grows later, people begin to seek their rest in preparation for the early departure. You return to the guest house, where pallets have been prepared with surprisingly comfortable bedding, woolen blankets stuffed with clean straw. Though you lie down, sleep proves elusive. Tomorrow, it seems, you'll witness a Dark Age battle, perhaps one of the very conflicts that would eventually be recorded in the sparse historical accounts of this period and later expanded into the legendary battles of King Arthur. Through the smoke hole in the roof, you can see stars, brighter and more numerous than in your light-polluted modern world. They're the same stars that have watched over humanity for countless generations, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires, to moments of greatness and terrible darkness. In this liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, between your own time and this ancient world, you reflect on what you've learned. The historical reality behind the Arthurian legends seems both more ordinary and more remarkable than the medieval romances would suggest. No magical sword Excalibur here, no wizardly spells from Merlin, no knights in shining armor, but something perhaps more impressive, real people fighting to preserve their way of life, to build something lasting in a time of great uncertainty. The soft sounds of the stronghold settling for the night eventually lull you towards sleep. The distant murmur of voices, the occasional bark of a dog, the whisper of wind through thatch. Your last conscious thought is anticipation of what tomorrow will bring. A glimpse, perhaps, of how the battles of a Dark Age warlord would transform, through centuries of retelling, into the glorious victories of the once and future king. You're awakened before dawn by the sounds of the stronghold, preparing for war. The low murmur of voices, the clink of weapons being gathered, the nickering of horses. For a moment, you lie still, remembering where you are, a guest house in a hill fort in 5th century Britain, about to witness events that might form the historical basis for the Arthurian legends. Outside, the eastern sky shows just the faintest lightning, stars still bright overhead. The air is cool and misty, carrying the scent of cook fires and damp earth. People move through the pre-dawn darkness with purpose, their faces serious but not panicked. This, you realize, is a community accustomed to threat and response. Bedweir appears at the guest house door. "Our Lord says you may ride with us if you wish," he says. Not in the battle line, of course, but with the observers on the ridge. Few from distant lands have seen how we fight to defend our homes. You agree readily, curious to witness history unfolding before your eyes. Bedweir nods and gestures toward a small cook fire where people are gathering to break their fast. "Eat," he advises. "We have a long ride ahead, and none can say when we'll next have leisure for food." The pre-battle meal is simple but hearty: barley porridge sweetened with honey, hard bread, and strips of smoked meat. A woman moves among the warriors with a large pottery jug, pouring a thin ale into wooden cups. This morning drink isn't for intoxication, but for calories and liquid, important for men about to exert themselves in battle. As you eat, you observe the war band preparing. These aren't the knights of later medieval romance, but something more akin to the Celtic warriors of earlier times, blended with elements of Roman military discipline. Some wear leather armor reinforced with metal plates, others wear mail shirts, thousands of interlocked iron rings that offer good protection against slashing weapons. Most have iron helmets, many clearly repurposed from old Roman designs. Their weapons are practical and deadly: iron-bladed spears with ash shafts, swords of various designs, small throwing javelins, and round shields made of wood covered with leather or linen. Some carry bows, though these appear to be hunting weapons pressed into military service rather than the specialized war bows of later centuries. Looking at these Dark Age warriors, you can see elements that would evolve into the heavily armored knights of later Arthurian tales. But the reality here is more pragmatic, more rooted in the necessities of survival. The leader, the man who might be the historical Arthur, emerges from the great hall, already dressed for battle in a mail shirt that gleams dully in the growing light. His helmet bears no crown, but is distinguished by a band of bronze around the rim. At his side hangs his sword in a leather scabbard reinforced with bronze fittings, not the magical Excalibur of legend, but clearly a weapon of excellent craftsmanship. He moves among his warriors, speaking briefly with various group leaders, checking preparations with the calm efficiency of an experienced commander. You notice how the warriors straighten when he approaches, eager for his approval, but not cowering in fear. He leads through respect, not terror. Myrddin stands nearby, watching the preparations with thoughtful eyes. Unlike the wizardly Merlin of later stories, he wears no magical robes, but simple wool garments with some embroidered symbols. A leather satchel hangs at his side, containing herbs for healing, you guess, not magical potions. "Will you join us on the campaign?" you ask him. Myrddin nods. "I go where our Lord goes," he says. "My knowledge of herbs can mend wounds, and sometimes my counsel aids in understanding our foes." "And you?" Bedweir says you'll observe from the ridge. When you confirm this, Myrddin studies you with those penetrating eyes. "Good. Watch carefully then. What you witness today is not just men fighting men. It is the meeting of different worlds, different visions for what these islands might become. Soon the warband is mounted and ready to depart. Perhaps 300 warriors in total, some on horseback, others on foot, arranged not in rigid formations, but in groups based on tribal affiliation or family bonds. These groups have trained together, fought together, and trust each other in the chaos of combat. You're provided with a sturdy pony and placed in a small group of non-combatants, a couple of tribal elders too old to fight but valued for their counsel, a young monk who serves as a scribe, and several messengers who will carry news of the battle to allied settlements. As you ride out through the gates of the stronghold, the sun peaks above the horizon, burning away the morning mist and revealing a landscape of rolling hills, patches of ancient forest, and small cultivated fields. The column moves at a steady pace, following old trackways that wind across the countryside. We go to the river crossing near the old Roman port, explains one of the elders riding beside you, a weather-beaten man named Geraint. If the Saxons wish to move inland, they must cross there. Our Lord plans to meet them at the ford. The strategic thinking is sound. Rather than allowing the invaders to push deeper into British territory, the defenders will confront them at a natural choke point, where the Saxons' numbers won't be as advantageous. As you ride, Geraint shares his knowledge of the Saxons. They come from the Eastern Sea, he says, pointing toward the distant coast. Their homeland is cold and often flooded, so they seek new lands. Some were invited as mercenaries generations ago to help defend against the Picts and Scots from the north. But more came, bringing families, looking to settle. He describes the Saxon culture as different from the Romano-British, more tribal, less influenced by Roman ways. They have their own gods, their own customs, he explains. Some learn our ways and live peacefully alongside us, but others, he gestures toward the horizon where you're headed. Others come with fire and sword, taking what they want. By midday, your group has covered considerable distance. The terrain has changed, becoming flatter as you approach the river valley. In the distance, you can see a thin column of smoke rising, evidence, perhaps, of the village the messenger mentioned being burned. The war band stops to rest briefly in a sheltered valley. Food is distributed. More hard bread, dried meat, and some early summer berries gathered along the way. The warriors check their equipment one last time, speaking in low voices about the coming battle. You notice young Gawain, sitting somewhat apart, his face serious as he sharpens his sword with practiced movements. Approaching him, you see a mixture of excitement and fear in his eyes, natural emotions for anyone facing their first major battle. I keep thinking of my father, Gawain says when you sit beside him. He died fighting the Saxons 3 summers ago. He taught me the sword from the time I could lift one. I hope... He pauses, swallowing hard. I hope I bring honor to his memory today. Throughout the journey, you've observed how this society views warfare. It's not the romanticized chivalric combat of later Arthurian tales, but neither is it viewed as glorious in itself. Rather, it's seen as a grim necessity, a duty to protect home and family. Warriors gain respect not for killing, but for preserving their communities through courage and skill. The rest period ends all too quickly, and soon you're riding again, now with greater urgency as scouts return with news that the Saxon force is indeed heading toward the river crossing. By mid-afternoon, you reach a range of low hills overlooking a broad river valley. The river itself gleams in the sunlight, a silver ribbon winding through green meadows. At one point, the river widens and shallows, the ford where the confrontation will happen. On the far side of the river, you can see movement, the Saxon war band emerging from a distant wood. Even from here, you can make out their distinctive appearance, many with long blonde hair and beards, carrying around shields painted with fearsome designs, armed with spears, long knives, the sayax that gave the Saxons their name, and throwing axes. Bedwyr leads your group of observers to a position on a hilltop with a clear view of the ford, but well back from the potential fighting. "Stay here," he instructs. "You'll see all that happens, but be safe from stray arrows or flanking movements." From this vantage point, you watch as the British force deploys with impressive discipline. The leader, this proto-Arthur figure, positions his warriors carefully. Spearmen form a shield wall near the ford, creating a bristling barrier of points. Behind them, sword fighters wait to exploit any breach. On the flanks, mounted warriors prepare to sweep around and attack from the sides if opportunity presents. Murden comes to stand beside you on the hilltop, his eyes narrowed as he studies the deployment. "Our Lord learned much from the old Roman manuals of war," he comments, "but he adapts their teachings to our weapons, our terrain, our enemies. That is his genius." As the Saxon force approaches the opposite bank, you witness something unexpected. Rather than immediately attacking, the British leader rides forward with just a small honor guard and raises his hand in a gesture for parley. After some visible discussion among the Saxon leaders, one of them, a tall figure in a helm adorned with raven wings, steps forward with his own guards. The two leaders meet in the shallows of the ford, water swirling around their horses' legs. Though you're too far away to hear their words, you can see they speak for some time, gestures occasionally punctuating their conversation. "What are they doing?" you ask Murden. "Our Lord always offers peace before war," the advisor explains. "He offers the Saxon leader land east of the river if they will settle peacefully and acknowledge his overlordship. Some accept such terms. Not all Saxons come for bloodshed alone. Many seek only land for their families." After what seems an eternity of tense conversation, the two leaders turn back to their respective forces. From the continued preparations on both sides, it's clear that peace has not been achieved. "The Saxon wants more than our Lord can give," Murden sighs. "So now blood must speak where words fail." What follows is not the choreographed, one-on-one combat of later Arthurian romances, but the harsh reality of Dark Age warfare. The Saxons advance across the ford in a wedge formation, shields overlapping, voices raised in a rhythmic chant that carries clearly across the valley. The British spear wall stands firm, presenting a hedge of iron points. From your distant vantage point, the battle unfolds like a living tapestry, terrible in its way, but also grimly fascinating as an historical moment. The initial clash sends ripples through both formations. Men fall on both sides. The ford's waters run red. For a time it seems the Saxon wedge might break through the British center by sheer momentum and weight of numbers. But then you see the British leader, this historical Arthur, move his mounted warriors in a sweeping arc to strike the Saxon formation from the flank. The maneuver works brilliantly, caught between the spear wall to their front and mounted warriors on their flank. The Saxon formation begins to crumble. Individual combats break out across the ford and on both banks, warriors grappling in the mud, the clang of weapons carrying clearly in the afternoon air. Through it all, you can track the British leader by his distinctive helmet and the banner carried nearby. A red dragon, you realize, a symbol that will feature prominently in later Arthurian legends. He fights not from a safe distance, but in the thick of combat, his sword rising and falling, his shield turning aside Saxon blows. He leads from the front, Geraint says beside you, pride evident in his voice. That is why men follow him, not because of his birth or wealth, but because he never asks others to take risks he will not take himself. The battle's tide turns decisively when the Saxon leader, he of the raven-winged helm, falls in single combat with the British commander. You can't see the details from this distance, but a great cry goes up from the British fighters, and the Saxon formation dissolves into a fighting retreat. Not all the invaders flee. A significant group lays down weapons and kneels in submission. This, too, is different from how later medieval tales would portray such conflicts. In the harsh realities of Dark Age survival, taking capable prisoners who might become settlers under your rule was often more valuable than slaughtering enemies. As the fighting subsides, leaving the ford and its approaches littered with fallen warriors from both sides, you witness the aftermath of Dark Age battle, something rarely depicted in later romantic tales. The wounded are gathered by comrades. Healers, including Myrddin, move among them, applying herbal poultices, binding wounds, sometimes performing the grim task of ending suffering that cannot be relieved. You notice the British leader moving among his wounded men, speaking to each, clasping hands or shoulders in recognition of their sacrifice. He shows similar respect to wounded Saxon prisoners, ensuring they receive care alongside his own men. This compassion toward defeated enemies might help explain how, in later centuries, Arthur would be remembered not just as a successful warlord, but as an exemplar of noble kingship. As evening approaches, a temporary camp is established on the British side of the ford. Fires are lit, sentries posted against any renewed attack. The dead are gathered for burial, British warriors to be returned to their home settlements for proper rites, Saxon dead to be buried in a common grave with whatever rituals their surviving countrymen deem appropriate. You're permitted to join Myrddin as he works among the wounded, applying his knowledge of herbal medicine. His methods blend practical Roman medical knowledge with older Celtic healing traditions. For pain, he uses extracts of willow bark, a natural source of the same compound found in modern aspirin. For preventing wound infection, he applies poultices of garlic, honey, and certain molds, practices that foreshadow modern antibiotic treatments. The Romans knew much of healing, Myrddin explains as he works, but our own wise women and healers preserved older knowledge too. Both traditions have value. You notice that while Myrddin works, he often murmurs what sound like prayers or charms, some invoking Christ as healer, others seeming older, perhaps addressed to Celtic deities of healing like Brigantia. Again, this blend of traditions characterized the transitional nature of Dark Age Britain. As darkness falls completely, you join a small gathering around one of the fires. The British leader is there, his armor removed to reveal a simple tunic, now stained with blood and mud. A minor wound on his forearm has been bandaged. He accepts a wooden cup of mead with a nod of thanks, his face showing the fatigue of battle but also quiet satisfaction at the day's outcome. Myrddin sits beside him, speaking in low tones. You catch fragments about the Saxon prisoners, arrangements for wounded warriors, plans for the next day's march back to the stronghold. This isn't mystical counsel from wizard to king, but the practical advice of an experienced advisor to a military leader. When they notice you hovering nearby, the leader gestures for you to join them. "Come, traveler," he says. "Sit and warm yourself. This has been a hard day, but a good one for our people." Settling beside the fire, you're struck by the man's presence. He's neither the mythical figure of later romances, nor a simple barbarian warlord. Instead, you see someone educated in Roman ways, but deeply connected to his British tribal roots, a leader trying to preserve what's valuable from the past, while adapting to the harsh new realities of a post-Roman world. When you carefully ask about his background, confirming what you've heard from others, he nods. "My grandfather was a Roman officer," he explains, "commander of cavalry along the northern frontier. He married a woman of the Brigantes tribe. My father served Rome too, until the legions were recalled. He taught me Roman letters, Roman tactics, but my mother was of the royal line of the Debuni, and from her I learned the old stories, the old ways." you realize you're hearing the life story of someone who might well be the historical Arthur, not the magical king of medieval romance, but a real Dark Age leader whose accomplishments would, over centuries of retelling, transform into legendary deeds. The Saxons call me Artorius Bear Killer, he continues with a small smile, because of a bear pelt I wore in my first battle against them. My own people shortened it to Artus or Art. Names matter little. What matters is that our people survive these dark times. This casual comment electrifies you. Here, perhaps, is the origin of the name Arthur, a battle title that would eventually become inseparable from the legend. As the evening deepens, warriors gather around various fires, sharing food and drink, treating wounds, remembering fallen comrades. You witness the communal grieving rituals of this society, not stoic silence, but open expression of loss through shared stories, songs commemorating brave deeds, and ritual toasts to those who've fallen. They fight fiercely, but not for glory alone, Murden observes, following your gaze to a group of warriors singing a low, haunting melody. They fight for their families, their homes, their way of life. That is why they follow our Lord, because he fights for the same things, not for personal power. Later, as the camp settles for the night, you find yourself unable to sleep despite the day's excitement. You wander to the edge of the camp, where sentries keep watch against any renewed Saxon threat. The night is clear, stars brilliantly visible in a way rarely seen in your light-polluted modern world. One of the sentries, an older warrior with a deeply scarred face, nods in acknowledgement of your presence. "Cannot sleep?" he asks. That's common after battle, even for those who only watched. He introduces himself as Bors, another name that will feature in later Arthurian tales. When you ask how long he has followed the leader, he chuckles. Since he was barely more than a boy, leading his first war band against Saxon raiders. 15 years now at least. I've seen him grow from a brave but reckless youth to the leader he is today. Bors describes campaigns against various Saxon groups, battles against Pictish raiders from the north, and even conflicts with other British tribes reluctant to join the alliance. Not all our own people welcomed his vision at first, Bors explains, and some tribal kings preferred their independence, even if it meant eventually falling one by one to the Saxons. His account helps you understand how this historical leader, whether named Arthur or something else, created a briefly unified British resistance against Saxon expansion, an achievement that would later be romanticized into the glorious realm of Camelot. Will we defeat them all in the end? Bors muses, gazing toward the eastern horizon where Saxon settlements lie. Who can say? They are many, and more come each year. But while our Lord lives, we hold them back, maintain something of the world we knew before. This realistic assessment matches the historical record. The Saxon advance was temporarily halted in the late 5th and early 6th centuries, possibly due to British resistance under a leader like Arthur, but would eventually continue until much of what is now England fell under Saxon control. Returning to the main camp, you pass by where the leader sits in quiet conversation with Murden and a few other advisors. Their discussion appears serious, not just about tomorrow's return march, but longer-term strategies for defending British lands and preserving their way of life. You realize you're witnessing leadership in its most fundamental form, not the divine right of kings from later eras, but authority earned through competence, courage, and care for one's people. This, perhaps more than any magical sword or mystical quest, explains why the memory of Arthur would endure through centuries. He represented the ideal of just leadership in uncertain times. As you finally settle back onto your sleeping mat, wrapped in a woolen blanket against the night's chill, your mind whirls with all you've witnessed. Today, you've seen the historical reality that might underlie the Arthurian legends, not knights in shining armor on noble quests, but practical fighters defending their homes, not magical battles against fantastical foes, but the grim necessity of warfare in an age of migration and change. Not a mythical king touched by divine favor, but a skilled leader uniting diverse peoples against a common threat. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that have watched over Britain through Roman occupation, Saxon invasion, Viking raids, Norman conquest, and beyond. In the gentle rhythm of breathing from sleeping warriors nearby, in the soft crackle of banked fires, in the occasional whinny of tethered horses, you find a connection to this distant past that's more immediate and real than any romantic tale. Sleep comes at last, bringing dreams not of mythical quests and magical swords, but of the people you've met. Bedwyr the loyal warrior, Myrddin the wise advisor, Gawain the young fighter honoring his father's memory, and the leader himself, this possible Arthur, whose real deeds would someday transform into legend. In their faces, their words, their actions, you've glimpsed the human reality behind the myth, and somehow that makes the story all the more powerful. Morning comes with the calls of birds and the soft movements of the camp awakening. Your sleep, despite the hard ground beneath you, was surprisingly deep, perhaps the result of yesterday's excitement and emotional exhaustion. Opening your eyes, you see the sky lightening from deep blue to the soft pink of dawn, wisps of morning mist rising from the river where yesterday's battle was fought. The camp is already active, with warriors packing equipment, healers checking bandages on the wounded, and cooks preparing a simple morning meal. The practical efficiency of these people continues to impress you. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary ceremony, just the focused activity of a community that understands its purpose. "Good morning," says a now familiar voice. Turning, you see Myrddin approaching with 2 wooden cups of steaming liquid. He hands one to you. "An infusion of mint and honey," he explains. "It refreshes after sleep and settles the stomach before travel." The warm drink is pleasant, and as you sip it, Myrddin explains the day's plans. "We return to the stronghold by a different route," he says. "Slower, to accommodate our wounded, but it allows us to pass through several allied settlements to spread news of the victory. Indeed, you soon observe a different rhythm to this day's journey. The war band moves at a deliberate pace, with wounded warriors transported on improvised stretchers, carried between horses, or supported on mounts led by companions. The Saxon prisoners, perhaps 30 men who surrendered during yesterday's battle, walk in a loose group, guarded, but not bound or mistreated. "What will happen to them?" you ask Bedwyr, who rides nearby. "They have sworn oaths to our Lord," he explains. "Some will be ransomed back to their people east of the river. Others, who have skills we need, smiths, carpenters, boat builders, may choose to settle in our territories under our protection." This pragmatic approach to former enemies reflects the fluid nature of Dark Age society, where practical alliances and the need for skilled hands often outweighed ethnic divisions. It helps explain how, over generations, Saxon and British communities would gradually integrate in some regions. As the column advances through the morning, you notice how the leaders constantly send scouts ahead and to the flanks. "The Saxons are not our only concern," Bedwyr explains when you ask about this vigilance. "Some British tribes to the west remain hostile to our lord's authority, and always there are outlaws and bandits who prey on travelers. By midday, your group approaches a small settlement nestled in a sheltered valley. Unlike the village you first visited, this one has more substantial defenses, a ditch and earthen bank topped with a wooden palisade. The gates stand open, however, and people stream out to greet the returning warriors. News of the victory has somehow preceded you, probably carried by fast-riding messengers dispatched during the night. The welcome is joyous, with women and children running to embrace returning fighters, elders nodding in approval, and the settlement's leaders stepping forward to formally greet the man you now know might be called Artorius, the possible historical Arthur. The column halts here for several hours, allowing the wounded to rest and everyone to enjoy a proper meal. The villagers bring out their best food, freshly baked bread, roasted meats, early summer vegetables, and mead in clay cups. It's a modest feast by modern standards, but represents significant generosity from people who live close to subsistence. During this rest period, you observe how information spreads in a society without printing or mass communication. The leader speaks formally to the village elders, providing a factual account of the battle. Meanwhile, warriors share their experiences with relatives and friends, embellishing some details while downplaying others. A youth with a small harp, a bard in training, you realize, moves among the groups, listening intently, occasionally asking questions. He gathers the stories, Murden explains, following your gaze to the young bard. He will shape them into songs and tales to be remembered when written words are few. In time, this battle will join others in the songs of our Lord's deeds. You're witnessing, you realize, the very process through which historical events transform into legend, the first steps in the long journey from a real Dark Age battle to the mythical conflicts of later Arthurian tales. While in the village, you also observe more of the practical crafts that sustain life in this era. Women spin wool into thread using simple drop spindles, a technology unchanged for thousands of years. Others weave the thread into cloth on upright looms. Men work leather into shoes, belts, and armor, or carve wood into bowls, spoons, and tool handles. What strikes you most is how few possessions people own compared to modern times. Each item represents significant labor and is made to last, used until it wears out, then repaired if possible, and finally repurposed when repair is no longer feasible. Nothing is wasted, and craftsmanship is valued highly. A small girl approaches you shyly, holding out a small wooden doll, her most precious possession, you guess. When you admire it, her face lights up. "My father made it," she explains proudly. "He's a woodcarver. He's making me a new one because I'm growing too big for this one." This simple interaction reminds you that despite the vast differences in material culture, the emotional lives of these people, their family bonds, their pride and skills, their small joys, remain recognizably human. As the day progresses, you witness another important aspect of Dark Age Britain, the religious practices that reflect a society in spiritual transition. The village has a small Christian chapel, a simple timber building with a cross mounted above its door, but near the edge of the settlement stands a sacred spring surrounded by stones, clearly a site of worship predating Christianity. When some of the wounded are brought to this spring for its healing waters, you notice how the attendants blend practices, making the sign of the cross while also leaving small offerings of food or flowers at the spring itself. No one seems troubled by this mixing of traditions. The Christ faith grows stronger each generation, Murden comments, observing your interest. The Romans brought it, and many find truth in its teachings. But the old ways knew things too, the healing powers of certain places, the turning of the seasons, the balance of all living things. A wise person honors both paths. This spiritual flexibility helps explain how elements of older Celtic beliefs, magical wells, enchanted landscapes, supernatural beings, would later intermingle with Christian elements in Arthurian legends. By mid-afternoon, your group is ready to continue the journey. The leader thanks the village elders for their hospitality, promising to send them iron tools and salt, valuable commodities, in appreciation. As the column reforms, you notice that a few village youths have joined the war band, eagerly accepting the chance to travel to the main stronghold and perhaps become warriors themselves. The afternoon's journey takes you through varied landscapes, open meadows where sheep graze, patches of ancient forest, and occasionally past the ruins of Roman villas or way stations, their stones partially reclaimed by nature or repurposed for newer, simpler buildings. Many great Roman works still stand throughout our lands, Bedwyr tells you. Roads, bridges, walls, buildings. We use what we can, but much of their knowledge has been lost. Our smiths cannot make steel of the same quality. Our masons cannot cut stone with such precision. Our potters cannot create such fine wares. This sense of living amid the remnants of a more sophisticated civilization helps explain the nostalgic quality that would later infuse Arthurian legends. The sense of a golden age lost, a civilization in decline trying to preserve what it can of former glories. As evening approaches, the column reaches another allied settlement, this one built directly on the foundations of an abandoned Roman fort. The square outline of the old Roman walls is still visible, though the current wooden palisade follows only part of the original perimeter. Within, Dark Age buildings, mostly timber and thatch, stand alongside the stone remains of Roman structures. After another welcome and another meal, simpler this time, as this settlement has less to share, you witness an evening gathering quite different from the previous night's tired camp. Now that the danger has passed and the wounded are being cared for, there's time for storytelling and music. In the central space of the settlement, villagers and warriors gather around fires as darkness falls. The young bard you noticed earlier produces his harp and begins to play, his fingers drawing surprisingly complex melodies from the simple instrument. He sings in the British Celtic language, though occasionally Latin phrases appear in his verses. Murden translates quietly for you. He sings of past battles, of great leaders who defended our lands against invaders. He weaves our Lord's victory yesterday into the longer tale of our struggles since the legions left. You're witnessing oral history in action, the preservation and transmission of cultural memory through song and story. This tradition, you realize, would eventually preserve the memory of leaders like Artorius long after their deaths, gradually transforming historical events into the legendary tales that would become the Arthurian cycle. Later in the evening, the leader himself speaks to the gathered community, not as a remote king pronouncing edicts, but as a first among equals, sharing plans and seeking input. He describes his strategy for securing the river frontier against further Saxon incursions, calling on this settlement to provide scouts and messengers for an early warning system. We cannot match the Saxons in numbers, he acknowledges candidly. They are many, and more come each season from across the Eastern Sea. But we can outthink them, outmaneuver them, use our knowledge of the land to our advantage. His practical approach to defense focused on realistic goals rather than grandiose visions of total victory, helps explain how British communities managed to halt the Saxon advance for a time, creating the historical circumstances that would later be romanticized as Arthur's glorious realm. When the formal meeting concludes, smaller groups form around the fires. You find yourself seated with Murden, young Gawain, sporting a bandaged arm from yesterday's battle, and several local elders eager for news from other regions. Their conversation reveals much about the challenges of this era, not just external threats from Saxons, Picts, and Irish raiders, but internal struggles too. Trade has diminished since Roman times, making certain goods scarce. Knowledge is being lost as fewer people can read the Latin texts preserved in monastery libraries. Disputes between tribes flare up despite the leaders' efforts at unification. It was easier in some ways under Rome, admits one gray-haired elder. Their laws were clear, their roads were safe, their coins were trusted everywhere. But we paid for that safety with our freedom, our traditional ways. And now we must find our own path, Murden responds, taking what was good from Rome, but remembering who we were before they came, who we truly are. This tension between Roman and Celtic, between past and future, between different visions of Britain's destiny, would become a central theme in later Arthurian tales, expressed through conflicts between characters, representing different values and traditions. As the evening progresses, you notice the leader sitting somewhat apart, deep in conversation with a travel-stained messenger who must have arrived while you were distracted. Their expressions are serious, their gestures suggesting disagreement or concern. "Trouble?" you ask Murden quietly. "Always," he sighs. News from the Northern Territories suggests the Pictish tribes are raiding again across the old Roman wall, and some of our own chieftains in the Western Highlands grow restless under our Lord's authority. This constant pressure from multiple directions, Saxons from the east, Picts from the north, internal divisions among the British themselves, helps explain why any unification achieved by a leader like Artorius would prove temporary. The historical reality was more complex than later legends would suggest, with no simple division between good and evil, no clear path to lasting victory. As people begin to seek their sleeping places for the night, you witness a small, tender moment that humanizes these historical figures. The leader, despite his obvious fatigue, takes time to visit each of his seriously wounded men, speaking quietly with them, clasping hands or touching shoulders in reassurance. You see how his warriors look at him with genuine devotion, not forced deference. He remembers every name, Bedwyr says, appearing beside you. Knows their families, their villages, their skills and hopes. That is rare in a great leader. This human connection, this compassionate leadership, might explain why the memory of a Dark Age warlord would persist and evolve into the noble King Arthur of later legends, not just his military successes, but his character as a leader who cared for his people. Finding your assigned sleeping place in a simple guest house, you settle onto a straw-filled mattress, pulling a woolen blanket against the night's chill. Through the smoke hole in the roof, stars are visible, the same constellations that these people know by different names, that guide their planting and harvesting, that feature in their stories of gods and heroes. Sleep comes more easily tonight, but brings vivid dreams, fragments of all you've witnessed merging with images from Arthurian legends you've known since childhood. In your dreams, the practical Dark Age warrior Artorius transforms gradually into the mythical King Arthur, his leather armor becoming shining plate mail, his hill fort evolving into the fantastic towers of Camelot. You see how, over centuries of retelling, historical events could take on magical qualities, how real people could become larger than life. You wake briefly in the deepest part of the night, the settlement silent around you except for the soft tread of night sentries and the occasional call of an owl. In this quiet moment between sleep and wakefulness, you reflect on what you've learned about the possible historical roots of the Arthurian legends. The real Dark Age Britain was harsher, more pragmatic than later romantic tales would suggest, a society fighting for survival amid the collapse of Roman order, the pressure of Germanic migration, and climate changes affecting agriculture and settlement patterns. Yet within this challenging reality, you've witnessed courage, wisdom, compassion, and community, the human qualities that would eventually be idealized in the Arthurian tradition. As sleep reclaims you, your last conscious thought is anticipation of tomorrow's arrival at the main stronghold and what final insights you might gain about the historical reality behind one of the world's most enduring legends. Morning begins early again, the camp stirring before full daylight. After a simple breakfast, the column forms for the final leg of the journey back to the hill fort stronghold that might be the historical kernel of legendary Camelot. Riding beside Bedwyr as the sun climbs higher, you ask him about the leader's background, hoping to understand more about how a real Dark Age warrior could evolve in cultural memory to become the mythical King Arthur. His father was a war leader before him, Bedwyr explains, commanding cavalry for the last Roman governors, then leading our defense after the legions withdrew. He taught our Lord Roman tactics, Roman ideas of law and governance, but his mother was of the old royal line of the Debuni tribe, keeper of the ancient stories and customs. Our Lord draws strength from both traditions. This dual heritage, Roman and Celtic, would become a defining characteristic of the Arthur figure in later legends, representing the blending of different cultural influences in post-Roman Britain. As you ride through the morning, you pass small farms and hamlets, where people pause in their work to raise hands in greeting to the returning war band. You notice how the land is worked, fields divided into strips, plowed with simple tools drawn by oxen, planted with barley, wheat, oats, and vegetables. It's subsistence farming for the most part, each community producing what it needs with little surplus for trade. Near midday, you crest a hill and see in the distance the distinctive outline of the stronghold, the concentric rings of earthworks circling the hill, the wooden palisades, the great hall at the summit. After days of travel and battle, the sight clearly lifts the spirits of the returning warriors. The final approach to the stronghold is marked by ceremony. Sentries on the outer walls spot the column and sound horns to alert the community. People stream from the gates to welcome the returning fighters, and as you enter the settlement, you're swept into a scene of joyous reunion. Families embrace returning warriors. Children dart between adults, excitedly asking about the battle. Elders nod in approval at the news of victory. The wounded are gently helped toward the healing houses, while the Saxon prisoners are led to quarters where they'll be housed until their fate is decided. Through it all, you observe the leader, the man called Artorius, the possible historical Arthur, moving among his people with natural authority, tempered by genuine connection. He isn't set apart by elaborate trappings of royalty or treated with fawning deference. His leadership seems based on earned respect rather than inherited privilege. As the initial excitement of the return subsides, practical matters take precedence. A council is called in the Great Hall to discuss the implications of the battle, the disposition of the Saxon prisoners, and strategies for securing the frontier. You're invited to attend, perhaps as a courtesy to a guest who has shared in the campaign's dangers. Inside the Great Hall, a large fire burns in the central hearth, smoke rising to vent through the hole in the thatched roof. The leader sits not on an elaborate throne, but on a simple wooden chair slightly elevated on a small platform. Around him gather representatives of different communities and interests, tribal elders, war leaders, craft masters, and a few women whose bearing suggests they hold positions of respect and authority. This gathering, you realize, might be the historical seed from which the legendary Round Table would grow, not a formal order of knights, but a council where different perspectives were heard and valued. The discussions are practical and direct. Reports are given about Saxon movements in other areas. Supplies are allocated for rebuilding the burned village near the river. Arrangements are made for integrating those Saxon prisoners who wish to settle under British authority. Throughout, You notice how decision-making is neither wholly democratic nor strictly hierarchical. The leader clearly has final authority, but seeks consensus when possible, listening to contrary views with genuine consideration. This balance of strong leadership with collaborative governance might explain why the Arthur figure would later be remembered as both a powerful king and the head of a fellowship of equals. As the council concludes, with tasks assigned and plans agreed upon, you find yourself reflecting on what you've witnessed during your time in this Dark Age world. Behind the romantic Arthurian legends of later centuries, you've glimpsed a more complex and in some ways more compelling reality, a society in transition, fighting for survival while trying to preserve what was valuable from its dual Roman and Celtic heritage. The real achievement of leaders like the historical Artorius wasn't establishing a fantastic realm of chivalry and magic, but something perhaps more impressive, holding together a fragmenting world, preserving knowledge and culture that might otherwise have been lost, and giving their communities a chance to adapt and survive through extraordinarily challenging times. This, you think, is the true once and future king, not a mythical figure who would someday return from Avalon, but the enduring human capacity for courageous, compassionate leadership in times of great uncertainty. That legacy lives not in magical swords or fantastic quests, but in the ordinary courage of people facing change and challenge with determination and hope. After the council disperses, you find yourself with an unexpected invitation. Myrddin approaches, his manner warm but somehow more formal than before. Our Lord wishes to speak with you privately, he says. He has questions about your homeland, your journey, your purpose here. You follow Myrddin to a smaller building adjacent to the Great Hall. Perhaps the leader's private quarters. Unlike the communal spaces you've seen so far, this room shows evidence of more personal use. A simple wooden table holds scrolls and writing implements, evidence that literacy, while rare, hasn't vanished entirely in this post-Roman world. Herbs hang drying from the rafters, filling the air with their fragrance. A fine wool tapestry depicting a hunting scene adds both decoration and insulation to one wall. The man you've come to think of as the historical Arthur, Artorius, the Bear of Britain, sits beside a small fire, his expression thoughtful. He gestures for you to join him on a bench while Myrddin remains standing nearby. For a moment, none of you speak, the only sound the gentle crackling of the fire and distant voices from outside. You have traveled with us, watched us fight, listened to our counsels, the leader finally says. Yet you remain a mystery, stranger. You dress differently, speak differently, know things you should not know, and ask questions about matters few would think to question. His tone isn't accusatory, but curious, even respectful. This isn't an interrogation, but an invitation to share, leader to leader, across a gulf of understanding that feels wider than just culture or language. With careful words, mindful of not disrupting history more than your presence already has, you explain that you come from a distant time, drawn by curiosity about this pivotal age when the old Roman order was fading and something new was taking shape. You mention that in your time, stories are told of a great leader who united the Britons against Saxon invaders, stories that have grown and changed over centuries. Rather than dismissing this fantastic claim, Artorius listens with surprising openness. Perhaps in an age where boundaries between natural and supernatural remain fluid, where Christian miracles and older magical beliefs coexist, the idea of a traveler from the future isn't entirely implausible. And these stories of this leader, he asks finally, what do they say of him? What manner of man do they claim he was? You hesitate, wondering how much to reveal. Finally, You speak of a just king who united warring factions, who fought to preserve civilization against barbarian threats, who gathered the best and bravest around him in common purpose. You mention a magical sword, a mystical advisor, knights on quests for sacred objects, keeping descriptions general enough that he might not recognize himself directly in these legends. Artorius listens intently, occasionally exchanging glances with Myrddin. When you finish, he is silent for a long moment, gazing into the fire. Stories change in the telling, he says finally. Deeds grow greater, men become more than men. The everyday transforms into the miraculous. It is the way of things. Myrddin nods in agreement. The bards must make their songs memorable, their tales compelling. Few would gather to hear of the mundane struggles we face, the broken harvest tools, the leaking roof thatch, the endless diplomacy with quarrelsome chieftains. So, the sword becomes magical, the victory more complete, the leader more perfect than any mortal man could be. There's no bitterness in their acceptance of how history becomes legend, only a pragmatic understanding of how memory and storytelling work. They seem to recognize that the transformation of truth into myth serves a purpose, preserving core values and aspirations even as factual details blur. What matters, Artorius continues, is not whether future generations remember my name correctly, or the exact battles I fought, or the true nature of my counsels. What matters is that they remember the struggle itself, to preserve knowledge, to maintain justice, to build community in broken times. His wisdom strikes you deeply. This man, whether the historical Arthur or not, understands that his personal legacy is less important than the values he embodies, the effort to protect civilization when its future hangs in the balance. Your conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a young boy, the same Say you met earlier, who might be the colonel of the later Sir Kay character. He brings word that the evening meal is being prepared and that visitors have arrived from a western settlement, bringing gifts and news. Artorius rises, the private moment giving way to public duties. Before you leave, however, he makes an unexpected offer. Remain with us for the turning of the moon, if you wish. Learn our ways more deeply. When you return to your own time, speak truly of what you have seen, not just our battles and councils, but our everyday lives, our hopes, our struggles large and small. With that invitation, you're released back into the bustling life of the stronghold. The remainder of the day passes in a whirl of activity as the community prepares for evening feasting and the reception of the new visitors. You observe how even celebrations require practical work. Food must be prepared, the great hall arranged, appropriate gifts gathered to reciprocate those brought by the visitors. As twilight approaches, you find yourself helping a group of women preparing bread for the feast. They've incorporated you into their work without fuss, showing you how to knead the coarse dough made from locally grown barley and spelt. Their conversation flows around you, discussions of children and households, mixed with astute observations about tribal politics and community needs. You realize that women in this society, while occupying different roles from men, hold significant influence. They manage households, practice healing arts, preserve cultural knowledge through stories and songs, and often oversee food production, arguably the most crucial aspect of survival. Some, like Branwen from the village where you first arrived, serve as respected community leaders and advisors. This more balanced gender dynamic helps explain why women in Arthurian legends, Guinevere, Morgan Le Fay, the Lady of the Lake, would play such significant roles, unlike the often marginalized female characters in other medieval tales. The evening's feast brings together the entire stronghold community. The great hall blazes with light from torches and the central hearth. People arrange themselves on benches along trestle tables. with the main table at the elevated end occupied by Artorius, his chief warriors, Myrddin, and the visitors from the western settlement. These visitors bring interesting news. They speak of trading ships from across the western sea, from Hibernia, Ireland, and even further, from the lands the Romans called Hispania. Despite the disruption of Roman trade networks, some maritime commerce continues, bringing occasional luxuries and news from distant shores. The world has not ended with Rome's retreat, Myrddin comments, when you express surprise at this continued connection to distant lands. It has changed, yes, grown smaller in some ways, more fragmented, but people still travel, still trade, still seek new horizons. This perspective challenges the common modern view of the Dark Ages as a time of complete isolation and cultural regression. While certainly more limited than during the height of Roman power, connections remained, preserving threads of commerce and communication that would eventually strengthen again in later centuries. As the meal progresses, the formal business of the gathering takes place. The Western visitors have come seeking judgment in a dispute between neighboring communities over grazing rights. Artorius listens to both sides, asks penetrating questions, and finally proposes a solution that draws on both Roman legal principles and older tribal customs. You're struck by how justice functions in this society, not through written codes and professional courts, but through the wisdom of respected leaders applying practical solutions to maintain community peace. Yet, there's structure to the process, combining elements of Roman judicial procedure with Celtic tribal traditions. After the formal business concludes, the evening turns to entertainment. A bard from the western settlement performs, his harp skills clearly respected even in this martial community. He sings tales of heroes from the distant past, figures from Celtic mythology like Cuchulainn and Bran the Blessed, but also more recent stories, including accounts of Roman generals who defended Britain against earlier invasions. Most interestingly, he performs a new composition about yesterday's battle at the river crossing. Already, you notice how the actual events you witnessed are being shaped into more dramatic narrative. The leader's combat with the Saxon chief described in more elaborate detail, the victory more complete, the Saxon retreat more decisive than what actually occurred. And so it begins, Myrddin murmurs beside you. The transformation from deed to legend, from man to myth. In 3 generations, this song will describe magical swords and divine intervention. His tone holds no criticism, only acceptance of the way human memory works. Stories must be memorable to survive, and each retelling inevitably reshapes events to emphasize meaning over literal accuracy. As the evening deepens and the celebration continues, you notice how different aspects of this society's heritage blend together. In one corner, children play a board game clearly derived from the Roman ludus Latrunculorum, a strategy game similar to chess. Nearby, warriors exchange boasts and arm wrestling challenges in a fashion that would have been familiar to their Celtic ancestors centuries before Rome's arrival. The food similarly reflects this cultural blend, dishes combining Roman culinary techniques with local ingredients, Mediterranean flavors adapted to British resources. Even their clothing shows this mixing of traditions, tunics cut in Roman styles but decorated with Celtic patterns, brooches incorporating designs from both cultures. What you're witnessing isn't the complete disappearance of Roman civilization, nor the untouched survival of pre-Roman Celtic culture, but something new emerging from the creative tension between these influences. Exactly the cultural matrix from which Arthurian legends would eventually grow. Late in the evening, when many have sought their sleeping quarters and the great hall grows quieter, Bedwyr joins you near the banked central hearth. His expression is thoughtful as he gazes into the glowing embers. "Myrddin tells me you may be leaving us soon," he says. "Returning to your distant home." When you acknowledge this, he nods slowly. "I thought this might be so. Travelers like you seldom stay." He hesitates, then continues. "Before you go, I would ask something of you. Remember us as we truly were, not perfect heroes from songs, not savages without learning or wisdom, but people striving to preserve what matters while adapting to a world in flux." His request touches you deeply. This warrior, who might be the seed of the legendary Sir Bedivere, isn't concerned with personal glory, or how his own deeds might be remembered, but with the authentic portrayal of his entire community, their struggles, their values, their humanity. "In your time," Bedwyr continues, "do people still face such challenges? The need to preserve knowledge while embracing necessary change? The struggle to build unity from diversity? The defense of community against those who would destroy rather than create?" His questions strike at the heart of human experience across all eras. You realize that despite the vast differences in material culture and specific historical circumstances, the fundamental challenges facing Bedwyr's society resonate strongly with those of your own time. "These struggles never truly end," you tell him honestly. "The forms change, the specific threats and opportunities evolve, but the essential human challenges remain." Rather than discouraging him, this answer seems to provide comfort. "Then perhaps our efforts here matter beyond our own time," he says. "Perhaps, in facing our challenges with courage and wisdom, we speak across the centuries to those who will face their own trials." This perspective, that human struggles and triumphs form a continuous thread connecting past, present, and future, offers a deeper understanding of why Arthurian legends have remained powerful for so long. They speak to enduring human concerns, presenting not just entertainment, but wisdom about leadership, community, and purpose that transcends their specific historical context. The next several days pass in a rhythm that gives you deeper insight into everyday life in this dark age community. You're welcomed into various aspects of the Stronghold's activities, sometimes observing, sometimes participating as your skills allow. You join hunting parties that venture into nearby forests, learning how these people sustainably harvest game using bows, spears, and trained dogs. Their knowledge of animal behavior and woodland ecology is sophisticated, passed down through generations of practical experience. You observe agricultural work in the fields surrounding the stronghold, seeing how crops are rotated to maintain soil fertility, how weather signs are interpreted to time planting and harvesting, how communal labor tackles the most demanding tasks like grain harvesting. In the craft workshops, you watch metal workers, potters, wood carvers, and weavers practicing skills that blend Roman techniques with older Celtic traditions. Without mass production, each item is made individually by skilled hands, often decorated with personal touches that reflect the maker's creativity within traditional patterns. Children's education happens through practical apprenticeship rather than formal schooling. Young ones follow adults through daily tasks, gradually taking on more responsibility as they demonstrate readiness. Stories told around evening fires transmit cultural values, historical memory, and practical knowledge in engaging forms that lodge deeply in young minds. Beyond these practical activities, you observe the community's spiritual life. The stronghold contains both a small Christian chapel, where monks lead prayers, and a sacred grove at the eastern edge, where older rituals honor the turning of seasons and significant life transitions. Most people participate in both traditions without apparent conflict, finding different but complementary meanings in each. Throughout these days, You have occasional conversations with Artorius, Murden, and others about matters both practical and philosophical. You're struck by how their thinking blends pragmatism with deeper reflection. They must focus on immediate survival needs, yet they also ponder larger questions about purpose, justice, and the future beyond their own lifetimes. One evening, you find Myrddin atop the stronghold's highest point, gazing at the stars. When you join him, he points out constellations, naming them in both Latin and the older Celtic terms. His knowledge of astronomy is impressive, a blend of Roman scientific understanding and traditional Celtic star lore. The heavens remind us that patterns endure even as individual lights are born and die, he says. So too with human knowledge, human societies. Rome has fallen from Britain, but not everything Rome brought has been lost. What matters survives, transforms, finds new expressions. This capacity to integrate different traditions rather than seeing them as mutually exclusive seems central to the cultural resilience of Dark Age Britain and helps explain the hybrid nature of Arthurian legends, which would eventually incorporate elements from Roman, Celtic, Christian, and even later Norman traditions. As your time in this world nears its conclusion, you find yourself drawn to the children of the stronghold, knowing they represent the generation who will preserve and transmit the memory of these times. You sit with them during evening story sessions, watching their faces as they absorb tales of Roman generals, Celtic heroes, Christian saints, and recent victories by their own leader. A particularly bright girl of perhaps 10 years asks you for stories from your homeland. Careful not to reveal too much, you nonetheless share some simpler tales that might resonate across the centuries. She listens with intense concentration, then nods seriously. "I'll remember your stories," she promises. "I'll tell them to my children, and they to theirs." In that moment, you understand viscerally how oral tradition works. The human chain of memory stretching across generations, preserving knowledge and wisdom even without written records. It's not perfect. Details change, contexts shift, meanings evolve. But the essential core persists, binding human experience across time. On your final evening, Artorius hosts a smaller gathering in the Great Hall, just his closest advisors, key warriors, and you. The atmosphere is contemplative rather than celebratory. These people sense that you'll soon depart, and there's a desire to share final thoughts, to ensure that what matters most about their world will travel with you. An older woman named Igraine, perhaps the seed of the character who would become Arthur's mother in later legends, speaks of the importance of remembering women's contributions to their society. "It is not only through war that we survive," she says firmly, "but through healing, teaching, nurturing, creating. These too are forms of courage, forms of strength." A warrior named Caius speaks of the honor code that guides their fighting. "We do not war for glory alone or for plunder," he insists. "We fight to protect what cannot protect itself, our children, our elders, our knowledge, our sacred places. A warrior without purpose